when we consider full stack web applications, they are typically implemented in layers, with the presentation layer concerned with presenting the information to the user in the front end, typically in a browser, the business application layer dealing with the logic behind the application, and then the data storage reflected in some kind of a database that stores or persists the data in the background. Now, when we implement this using a full stack JavaScript approach, then we would be using some kind of a front-end framework like React or Angular to implement the presentation layer. Then we would be using an Express.js framework to implement the server, taking care of the business logic, and then the data persistent itself implemented as a database in the form of MongoDB. Now, when you have these disparate set of responsibilities to be implemented using Docker, should we implement all of these in a single container, or can we separate them into different containers? So this is where we use the single responsibility principle, where each Docker container should be self-contained and responsible for one particular aspect of the full stack web application. So you would typically implement the Express.js application running in a container, maybe talking to another container running MongoDB in the backend. And then, of course, the front end is always going to be run in a browser for a web application. Now, in that case, when you have a multi-container based application implementation, how do these containers communicate with each other? Fortunately for us, Docker already implements a networking within the Docker framework. To briefly understand network support in Docker, let's type Docker network ls at the prompt, and you can see that the currently running Docker already supports a bridge there, which will help you to connect multiple containers together. Now, by default, there is a standard bridge that is implemented in Docker. I presume that you already have some basic understanding of networking, and you know how a bridge works in helping various servers communicate with each other. Now, in Docker, the networking support is implemented completely in software, and there is a default bridge that is implemented as a standard Docker network support. So if you run a container on Docker, then it is automatically connected to this default bridge. But by its very nature, the default bridge allows multiple containers to run and connect with each other on itself. Maybe when we design our own multi-container application, we may not want our containers to run on this default bridge, which everybody else may be allowed to access. So in this case, Docker also allows us to create our own bridge. So we can say Docker network create, and then give a name for our own network. So let's just call this as node app net. This node app net can be used to connect the Docker containers that are going to implement our full stack web application. Now, if you do Docker network list, you will see that we have a new bridge with the name node app net created there. So if you implement your application as a multi-container application, these containers can be then connected to this node app net, and they can communicate over this network. We will deal with more details about Docker networking in the next video, but let's now examine how we can run a multi-container application. For your convenience, I have already designed two containers, one container running an Express-based server and another container running MongoDB server, which is already pre-initialized with some data. So let's go ahead and then fetch them from my Docker Hub and then launch the two containers. Now, when you launch the container, you can automatically specify that this container will be connected to a given network. And let me show you how we can go ahead and do that. Let's first launch the MongoDB server. So at the prompt, let's say docker run -d to run the MongoDB container in the background. We will not have to specify the port connectivity because by default the 27017 port of MongoDB is available for us. Then we will say -net and specify node app net. So we'll connect that to the node app net, and then we will specify the name as MongoDB. Now, when you specify the name to a container, this container can be addressed in this network by using that
It's 1:30.
name. So this particular container can be accessed at MongoDB with port number 27017. And let's run Mongo Server at this port. And once the Mongo image is downloaded and the Mongo server launches, which will take a little bit of time, then we can go ahead and launch the Express server. So let's again run the Express server at port number 3000, so -dp, and then connect this to the node app net, that the user defined network that we have just created, and then give it a name as node server and node server and launch the Express server. And once the Express server is launched, let me open my Docker dashboard, and you would see that in my Docker dashboard, two containers are running. And these two containers are going to be communicating with each other over the user-defined network. Now, let's go ahead and see what the server is serving up. Going to your browser, let me type localhost 3000, and you should see my server serving up this website. So my Express server is acting both as a API server to serve up a REST API, plus it is also serving up this website. So this application that I've implemented using React, I have built the React application and then put it into the public folder of my Express server. So that is why when you access localhost 3000, it is able to fetch the React application into the browser and then launch the React application on the browser. Now, this React application is obviously communicating with the server running at localhost 3000 and is serving up the content that is shown on the screen here. Now, if you want to know exactly what the server is serving up, I can go to the REST API endpoint. So when I say API news, then you see that it is serving up JSON data at this API endpoint, the REST API endpoint, which is being used by my React client to display the news items on the screen as shown here. So we have just seen our first multi-container Docker application. So you have one container running the Express server, a second container running the MongoDB, and the two are communicating with each other over the user defined network, the Node App Net that we have just created earlier. If you're wondering how I created these images, we'll come to that question at a later stage. But I have already illustrated to you in the earlier exercise how to package up an Express server into a container.